Good evening, everyone. This is Pat Wright, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association. And I want to welcome everybody and thank you all for participating tonight. I also want to thank all the family members that are attending, along with all the educators that are also attending this webinar. You are doing absolutely extraordinary work in an absolutely extraordinary time. And so I congratulate all of you for everything you've been doing for the students of New Jersey. I know that as parents and family members, we're all engaged in a balancing act, right? I'm sure you're all trying to help your children with their schoolwork. And at the same time, you probably have work to do, some of you remotely, some of you have faced the stress of the economic stress of loss of employment. So there's a lot of things that families are now trying to balance. And recognizing that, it was my pleasure to work with Kathy Lindenbaum, the president of the New Jersey PTA, because Kathy and I and our organizations have collaborated on many things in the past, but it was so important to think about what could we be doing at this point, what could we be doing to support our families that are part of our school community. And so this series was born, Tools for Families, right? And the first session was about social emotional health of our family members. The second session, which is this one, is about meeting the needs of our children with disabilities. And the third session will be Tuesday night, April 28th at 7 p.m. And that will be about using social media responsibly to engage our students and to engage your kids at home. So with that, I want to thank the development team led by Barbara Gantler, who will speak in a minute. But I also want to thank Kathy Lindenbaum again for her willingness to collaborate always. And Kathy, I'll let you say a few words.
Thank you, Pat. Again, like Pat said, I'm Kathy Lindenbaum, the president of New Jersey PTA. New Jersey PTA, along with New Jersey PSA, would like to welcome everyone who's joining us this evening, in particular the parents and the educators. Please know that New Jersey PTA advocates for all children, which includes children with special needs. Our hope this evening is that you can help you and your children along during this crisis. Please remember, you can visit our website, newjerseypta.org at any time, and have updates on information pertaining to COVID-19. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and we hope this webinar will help you navigate through this very challenging time. I would like now to introduce Barbara Gantler. Barbara is the coordinator of special projects at New Jersey PSA, FEA, and formerly the State Director of Special Education and Assistant Commissioner of Student Services at the New Jersey Department of Education.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure for us to partner with the PTA on this important topic. I want to just let you know and introduce our other speakers for tonight. We have David Nash, who is the Legal One Director and Director of Legal Learning here at NJPSA. Susan Colicella, a parent of a young man with disabilities, who is the Director of School and Youth Engagement for Special Olympics. We have Dr. Paul Barbado. Do we have Susan's picture? And Paul Barbado, there you go. And Dr. Barbado is the Director of Special Services for Dumont Public Schools. And we have Dr. Ashley Zoltanki, who is a school psychologist with Behavior Therapy Associates. So thank you all. Just some housekeeping to let you know that we will be sending out an email very soon, tomorrow or very shortly, with a link to the webinar that you will be seeing, the PowerPoint, and a tool that we have for you that you're going to receive. In addition, just so you know, you will be having the opportunity to ask questions. We will have an opportunity to answer some of them, but no doubt we will not be able to answer all of them. So at a later date, we will be answering some of the frequently asked questions, and we will be posting them on our site and on the PTA site. So let me just tell you a little bit about what we would like to do tonight. First of all, we're going to be providing some guidance on providing services during this emergency. Some of that guidance is federal guidance. We want to talk a little bit about the expectations that parents should have for the services that they're receiving, and review some of the issues that have come up in providing service during this closure. We will, of course, recognize the challenges and the varying needs of families and parents at this time. And we're excited to bring you a tool to use to help you articulate and identify what's going on in the programs that you're providing and that their children are receiving at homes, in order to facilitate a really constructive means of dialogue with your district. Because of course, the focus of all of this is communication and collaboration in order to serve our students. We're going to provide resources for you, and we're going to provide tips and information on dealing with challenging behavior, which certainly is occurring sometimes. And as I said, an opportunity for questions. Next slide. So first of all, as Pat said, we recognize the challenges for schools and families in this unprecedented time that we find ourselves in. Schools are reinventing themselves, and overnight it felt like they had to move from being a building-based program, and they had to do that with staff that may or may not have been very familiar with the online platforms and different uses. So we know and appreciate and recognize how hard teachers and schools are working to connect with families, to instruct, to support, to provide quality programs in this most difficult environment. And we also, as Pat mentioned, recognize the extraordinary challenges that families are facing at this time. The stress level in some homes is quite high, as we know. We have parents who are trying to work at home at the same time as be the teacher for their children. They may be working out of home and have difficulty with childcare. They may have no material or equipment, or the kind of equipment and the Wi-Fi and the connections that are needed. They may be struggling with not really knowing how to use all of this equipment and the programs. Some people are sick. Some people are caring for other people. Could be the situation of being unemployed. We have children who are homeless. We have families that are food insecure. So we have all those issues. And now, please go to the next slide. Now we're asking families to be teachers and service providers. So we need to recognize the extraordinary challenge of that and talk about what schools can do and what families do in relationship with schools to collaborate to address these many needs and to support our students. Now, all of those issues are for all students, but the students that we're talking about are students with disabilities. They've already been determined to require additional services, specialized services, specially trained professionals. So they need more. We're talking about students who don't just sit down and do everything that we give them to do without the additional support. So the challenges are even greater. We also know that for some of our students with more severe disabilities, we can't just give them an online program or a packet of materials and think that they're going to be able to do that without the support that they're accustomed to. And so parents and families become even more a part of the instructional team. And this again is going to require more support, communication and collaboration. That's our mantra between the school and the families. Now, these are students who've had many services and professionals working with them every day at school. For these students, some of them, the routine, for all of them, the routine is gone. The socialization opportunities that they have at school is gone. So all of this provides us with challenges that we need to recognize and to develop support. Next, please. So what services can parents expect? So the USDE has talked about in their guidelines that to the greatest extent possible, students with disabilities must be provided the special education and related services that's in their IEP. And it says they have to consider all delivery options and provide what's feasible. So to the greatest extent possible, what is feasible? Said that if online instruction is provided to general ed students, then it should be available to students with disabilities as well. Issues of equity. But it's critical in all this that we keep the individual in the IEP in mind, that it's based on the particular student needs, that it may not be what everybody else is getting. But the idea is we're going to, in schools, make every effort to the greatest extent possible to provide all of the services, but it's going to look in a different way. Next slide, please. So the USDA has said they will provide flexibility where possible. Now, we don't know all the flexibilities that the USDE is talking about. We know some of them, and I know David's going to go over a number of them with you this evening. But we recognize that FAPE, free, appropriate public education, is going to look different. It can't possibly look the same. And what the USDE has said is that it may include, as appropriate, online service, distance instruction, virtually, telephonically, the old telephone, and it is going to be a variety of ways that we provide the services, but we also have to remember that there are many related modifications that also may be provided online. And they're also saying that educators may still meet their legal obligations by providing something different to students with disabilities from students in general ed, if that is appropriate for the students with disabilities. Next. So to think about it, we have to say that the decisions must be made individually based on the appropriateness, based on safety issues, based on the specific student's IEP and student concerns. What works for one student will not work for all students, and that programs have to address the modifications or accommodations that are included in that program, again, wherever feasible. So we have to think the parent is looking to be sure that the student's program, first of all, is accessible. What is the student being asked to do? Are they being asked to use a tablet or a computer? Do they have it? Do they have Wi-Fi? Do they have the connections that they need? Is the student able to engage in the program? Merely providing a program that the student cannot engage with. We have students who cannot sit down in front of a computer and engage in a classroom situation. Is the work appropriate? Is the work challenging? Does it meet the student's needs? Is it related to the work that they're doing? We know that schools should address all of those modifications, and they should do whatever they can to provide FAPE. They should be providing all the services they possibly can. But we also have to recognize that the issue may be an issue of compensatory services, because not all services may be provided. Not all services may be feasible. And if those services are not provided and the student cannot get a FAPE, a free appropriate public education, then that issue is going to be one that we need to think about. And David's going to talk a little more about that in detail, but that's something else to expect, to understand that that is an issue. Communication is going to be the key, and you know this, you're dealing with this. Parents need to be able to identify what's going on in the program, what are the gaps, what are the successes, what are things that are going well, and they have to have a way of addressing this with districts. Now, we're very pleased tonight to be able to give you a tool that Susan developed to really help parents look at the program and articulate what are the areas that they need to address. This tool will be a great tool also for documenting the programs that the student has been receiving and how they are doing. And parents need to also identify their own needs. They are going to have to do a lot, and some of those things require assistance. And I know that schools are trying, very hard to connect with parents, to call parents, to consult with them. Some are struggling more than others in how to do this on a regular basis, but that is going to be key. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about related services because many of our students receive related services, a critical part of their programs. And there has been some confusion over the provision of related services. The confusion between federal and state, the state guidance originally said that you could not provide online related services. The federal guidance said you could and should provide online related services. That's confusion has been eliminated in that the State Board of Education has adopted an emergency regulation that specifically allows related services to be provided online. And they can provide it by the school district personnel, clinics and agencies, if that's who they used, through remote or online platforms. So that's going to be a very important issue because children are receiving so many services, and that's another avenue for them to get them. Next slide, please. And this permission, this issue is for all related services. So it's speech, OT, PT, counseling services, and these related services may be provided in a variety of ways. They should always be provided in coordination with parents. They can be done in groups or individually with different online platforms, always in consideration of safety issues, scheduling. This has to be scheduled and discussed with the parents, and based on the student's individual needs and the appropriateness of the methodology. Next slide. So what can parents expect? They definitely should expect to know how services will be delivered, what supports will be provided, and how they will be communicating with the districts. They need to know how to contact their case manager, teacher, the principal to address any of their questions and concerns. The more communication, the better. We know that districts are working hard and struggling to get that out, and we know how often the teachers are spending time, the special education staff, to connect with families, to provide the assistance. But adjustments to these plans may be needed on an ongoing basis. So lines of communication will be critical. Next. So parents need to also understand, and I know you do, that sometimes services will not be able to be delivered in the same way. I mean, we're not going to have perhaps a paraprofessional who's with the child all day in the house. They're not going to be in the house. How does that impact? So parents understand, we all understand that sometimes a service or an instructional can't be done. But what we need to know is that when we get back to school and school reopens, that these issues will be discussed in the context of compensatory services because some students may be eligible for it. So that's an important thing for us to keep in mind. We are all in uncharted territory, and we're all really learning as we go along. And we do know that it's, again, communication. We also want to recognize that for some families and some parents, this is more of a crisis than it is for some others. And they may need more immediate assistance from outside of the school. And so we're going to give you some resources, suggestions, if you know families who need that. But we recognize that for some, this crisis is intense. Next. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to my colleague, David Nash, Director of Legal One.
Thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate all of your great work in organizing and putting this wonderful team together. So I wanted to start by talking about some of the challenging issues that we have to work through when it comes to balancing privacy and other interests. We are in uncharted waters here. We are struggling with issues that we couldn't have imagined that we would be dealing with as a state and nation. And districts are working very hard to make sure that we're doing everything we can to serve our students, to protect their privacy, and to make sure that we are equitable in providing access to a high quality education for every student. And that can be incredibly challenging in some situations. We also know how important social and emotional learning is as an essential component of a free and appropriate public education, and how important it is for us to provide the same high quality remote instruction that we're providing for other students whenever possible for students with disabilities. So that is a governing principle that we are committed to. We know that student privacy is governed by federal law to a large extent. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act lays out the overall rules for how we address issues of student privacy, and I'll discuss that in a moment. We do give you a link here. I see it's a little difficult to see that link, but it's on FERPA and virtual learning related resources. This link came out from the U.S. Department of Education in March of this year, and it provides some important guidance on issues of student privacy during this pandemic. So let's move to the next slide. So one of the obvious issues that, of course, is coming up now is the issue of the virtual classroom. And in many situations, we do have students who are able to see their teacher on the screen. Teacher is able to see that student and others. And of course, it's inevitable and really something that is going to happen in many cases. We are going to have parents or others in the home oftentimes while their child is in a virtual classroom. And that means that the parent may be able to see other students on the screen in that classroom. And certainly we want to be sensitive to issues of student privacy. I do want to reassure parents that it in no way violates state or federal law for you to be there and to be observing what is happening in that classroom, even though you are seeing other students. Just like it would certainly be permissible for a parent to come to school and visit a classroom. And that happens regularly across the country. So there is no prohibition under federal or state law from a parent being able to see what's actually happening. Of course, it's critical that we do everything possible together to protect student privacy. So teachers understand that they should not be disclosing information about a child's disability in that classroom discussion. We should not be disclosing that type of private information. And to the extent that another student discloses that information, it's obviously very important that we all work to protect privacy and redirect that conversation and not share private information. So we can move on to the next. The U.S. Department of Education has also thought about some challenging issues when we do run into potential disputes between a parent and a school district. So certainly the parties to any potential dispute can agree to extend the timeline for completing a complaint investigation if there is a complaint filed with the state regarding delivery of services. This is certainly going to be one of those extraordinary circumstances that would justify extending the typical 60-day timeline when it comes to responding to state complaints, given the pandemic that we're working through. So this is certainly a situation where we would expect there will be, and there have been, extensions granted to those timelines. But we also know that if we run into situations where there are disagreements, it's critical that the parties do everything possible to work together to communicate. So you will be hearing so much more about that from the presenters after me, some important tools that we can use to try to reduce the chance that we run into the need for due process. The parties, of course, can agree to extend the timelines for the initial resolution session that is required to occur if we have a dispute between the parties. And the administrative law judge can, at the request of a party, extend the 45-day timeline that we have built into our state administrative code for completing hearings. Go to the next slide. So one of the challenging issues that is certainly going to arise in a number of cases is the issue of compensatory services. School districts are doing incredible work, working so closely with students, working so closely with parents to provide the best possible education that we can for all students, including students with disabilities. But we know that there will be some situations that arise where students will need compensatory services because we are not always going to be able to provide the same level of education during this pandemic, during this closure. So it's important that school districts communicate closely with parents. It's important for you as parents to communicate closely with your school district about the issues that you are seeing with your child, any challenges that are coming up, the supports that could be provided now without having to wait later to have to consider compensatory services. So communication is key. The Department of Education has recognized that in some situations, if a student has no internet connectivity and the district is home instructing, that we may be in a situation there where compensatory services must be considered and determined by the IEP team when school resumes. So school districts have become incredibly creative at working with parents to try to provide greater access to online instruction, but we know it's not always possible. So we do think that there are some key questions that should help you think through, does my child actually need compensatory services after working through this particular situation? So one question, how long was the student school closed? Obviously, the longer this closure goes on, the greater the potential need for compensatory services. The second question is a really important one. Was there a disproportionate impact on a child with a disability as compared to other students during the closure? Unfortunately, there will be some challenges that all students are facing because of this closure, but we don't want to see a greater impact, a disproportionate impact on students with disabilities. So we can move to the next slide. Some other key questions that you should think about when it comes to the need for compensatory services. Was the student provided instruction or services via some alternative method during the closure? So you want to consider what methods were used. Were those methods that were provided as beneficial as what we would normally provide for that student? Was the student engaged? Did the student access the instruction and services that were made available? Is there clear documentation of the amount of instruction and services that the student was provided? So very important that parents communicate very closely with the school district, because we do have plans, of course, that are laid out for each student, that we have individualized IEPs for each student. But if for some reason the student isn't able to access those services, it's critical that school districts know that right away. Are there indications the student regressed during the statewide closure? Are there specific skills that potentially are not being addressed as well as they otherwise would have been? Is there a possibility that a student will require extended school year services due to that regression? So we want to consider that. So we certainly want to make sure that we're looking at any additional services or potentially issues related to the emotional, medical, academic needs of that student and the potential need for reevaluation. We do not automatically provide compensatory services on an hour-for-hour basis. What we do is look at the individualized needs and impact for each particular student. Let's move on to our next slide. The U.S. Department of Education, in a memo that came out on March 21st, specifically noted that compensatory services should be considered when there's a delay in providing services or making decisions on how to provide services. So, of course, given the unprecedented situation that we are going through, in some situations, despite our best efforts, there were some delays in providing services. And that would be a reason to consider compensatory services. And we know that in many cases, services are being provided in a variety of ways. In some cases, students are receiving packets, they are receiving other means of instruction, and we certainly want to look at each particular circumstance and look at the impact compared to other students. Move on to the next slide. So what about initial evaluations of students? Some portions of initial evaluations can still be completed. So it's important that in many cases, so it's important that the school district still work closely with parents, try to do as much as we can during this period of closure. So if there are portions of that evaluation that we can move forward with, we should do that work now. And then we would complete the remaining aspects of the evaluation when school reopens, of course, including any necessary assessments or testing that we weren't able to do during the closure. Next slide. So reevaluations raise similar issues. Districts should work with parents to complete all aspects of the reevaluation that we can complete during the closure. And we know that some things we may not be able to do. So needed assessments and testing, we will look to do when school resumes. Recognize that a reevaluation doesn't automatically require assessments. And if we have a situation where none are determined necessary by the IEP team and the parent working together, the reevaluation could be completed during a school closure. And the reevaluation can also be waived with parental consent. So there might be a situation where you are very comfortable as a parent waiving that reevaluation. And certainly can request and obtain that consent while schools are closed. Move to our next. The U.S. Department of Ed, in a recent memo, also states that a reevaluation may be conducted through a review of existing data, and that the review can occur without a meeting. And in some cases, it would make sense to do that and without obtaining parental consent, unless it's determined that additional assessments are needed. So there will be times where it does make sense to look at the existing data that we have. Our next slide. IEP meetings are another important issue to think through. So state regulations do not specifically provide for holding IEP meetings by audio or video conference, but again, we are in unprecedented times. Given the current circumstances, and in order to make sure we're doing everything possible to serve students and complete necessary tasks, like an annual review or a reevaluation, it is reasonable that we look to do virtual IEP meetings, as long as the school and the parent are able to work together on this and the parent consents to doing the meeting through audio or video conference. And in many cases, many parents will be more than willing to support that option. Next slide. So when we're holding IEP meetings through audio or video conference, again, we only would want to do that if the parent is comfortable with it and consents. Only do that during this unique challenge while schools are not in session because of the public health related closure. And we always, of course, would want to document the need and reason for holding the meeting by audio or video conference, so it's clear why the unusual step was taken in a case like this. So it's important for you to know your rights. We've given you here some links to make sure that you know your rights as a parent, that you're able to effectively communicate with the school district. So one of the links that we give you here is the Parental Rights and Special Education book that was updated in August of 2019. And that is a very important document that lays out in clear language your rights as a parent. We also give you a link to New Jersey Department of Education guidance that came out because of the pandemic and some of the unique issues that we want to be aware of during the pandemic. And we give you U.S. Department of Education guidance on special education that came out because of the pandemic that we are working through. So with that, I'll pause for a moment to see if we have any particular questions that we might want to address.
One thing that was asked was about the link to FERPA to be provided, and I believe that is in the PowerPoint, David. Is that correct? So people will get it?
That is correct. In one of the earlier slides, we embedded the link to FERPA in the PowerPoint. So you do have access to that. And of course, you will receive the PowerPoint afterwards. So you're not able to interact with it on the screen now, but you will get a PowerPoint that has the embedded link.
And you managed to answer some of the questions that came up. One was about privacy and in group work. the question was, would the DOE be providing guidance or criteria when making decisions about compensatory education? And
So we
go
have
ahead.
this guidance that's come out from the U.S. Department of Education and some important guiding questions. It's possible that New Jersey will supplement that at some point. But I think the guidance that we have does lay out, important considerations and should give enough direction to help parents and school districts. But if we do get additional guidance on that, we'll certainly put that out for everyone to see.
Okay, I think we can introduce the next speaker.
Yes. So it's my pleasure to now introduce Susan Colacello. Susan is the Director of School and Youth Engagement for Special Olympics New Jersey, and Susan has put together some really wonderful resources to help you consider how do we most effectively communicate between the parent and school district. So Susan.
Thank you, David. And I also want to thank the New Jersey PTA and NJPSA for really thinking about parents and how challenging this is for all of us. So I thought about the whole idea of being a pandemic parent and all of us being pandemic parents. And I realized on Sunday when I woke up, it felt a little heavier and a little bit more stressful going into the 5th week of all this. And last night I was watching the pandemic relief fundraiser that they were doing on, and a nurse came on, and it really moved me. She said, we didn't sign up for COVID-19, but we're showing up for COVID-19. And I think it really kind of framed what I'm hoping that I can help share with you guys tonight, is that we as parents didn't sign up to be teachers right now. And, but we're showing up, and we're showing up for our kids, but we need to show up for ourselves and each other right now, because this is a really heavy lift for some of us. And for some of you, as Barbara said earlier, it's crisis mode. So I really thought it'd be useful once to take a step back and think about what our homes look like. I started to look at my son, and I picked this picture because I never really thought at this moment in time that that we'd be running around in masks. And I had to deal with a really real concern of his, which was that he was terrified of the mask. So I started to look at the idea of me trying to struggle through this learning and learn how to use the software that was coming at me, balance every day with my own work obligations. And all of a sudden I look at this kid who's like, hearing the news and starting to cry. So I think that a huge piece of this for all of us is balancing what's going on in our homes. How are we doing being caregivers? Do you have an elderly parent? And looking at, okay, that is all one piece of this. And I'm supposed to really be thinking about, is my son or daughter getting what they need? And how is the education learning going in the home? And as Dave said, I work for Special Olympics New Jersey. So in addition to Barbara saying that we're really focused here on communication and collaboration, I would always come back and say, and also celebration. So I had to find a way to make this mask thing funny. I have to find a way to entertain Kevin while he learns. So we really want to talk about being forgiving and kind and also celebrating. So next slide, please. So virtual learning is learning in our home. So we're going to use this tool. And the idea in coming up with the tool was that sometimes things feel super overwhelming, and it's really easy to say, oh my God, this isn't working. I can't do this. So we really thought it's probably helpful for us to kind of break this down into pieces so that we can have that articulation of some clear things that are working and aren't working, so we can engage the school district, engage the teachers as partners and collaborators in problem solving. And I really didn't even think about the IEP for the first 2 weeks into this. I was just too overwhelmed with managing my job and my fears about, is Kevin going to get this? Is my 90-year-old mom going to get this? And learning how to use Google Classroom. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, but wait a second, he is supposed to be getting the supports and services. So how do we break that down? And also, how do we balance the reality of what is happening to these kids now? They are losing their social networks, they're losing their activities, their routines. So what do we prioritize? And if you look around at your entire family, how many kids you have, what is the most important thing to hold the family together and to maintain learning. Remembering that we're all parents first, we have families, and in our effort to advocate for each child, we will probably find out that the kids that have more significant needs, their learning may not be met at home as well. So if we can go to the next slide, this is our tool. So it's called the Virtual Learning Communication Inventory, because basically what we thought would be helpful is to have an inventory. Like, how do we go through the things that are critically important and find out what's working, what's not, based on all different aspects of what it means to be learning at home. And once again, we want this to help us with effective communication so that we can identify specific things that can be addressed. And as Barbara said, this can also start to document things for later. So if you are going to talk about compensatory learning and you're concerned about regressions, this could help you itemize and identify specific things that might be causing regression. Okay, next slide. So let's look first, and these are all the categories that we thought would be beneficial for us to explore. What's working, what's challenging. So the home learning environment. Is there enough workspace for everybody? Are you in one space, you have 3 kids learning, 2 kids learning? Do kids have private time? Do they have quiet? And is the scheduling understandable? Can you juggle everything? The next would be the technology and the access to technology and training. I had to learn a lot of software. You're probably being asked to learn software. They're using Google Classroom, Flipgrid, Zoom, but then more basic stuff. Do you have the bandwidth? Are your kids sharing computers? And do you have the skills to support your kids? That gets to the next level, which is training and preparation. We all were, and I have to say the schools too, this happened super fast. We were all plummeted right into this. Did you have adequate training and did you know what was coming? It might be worthwhile to get in touch with your teachers in your districts and say, hey, we just need to put the skids on here for a minute and take a step back. I have to understand what's being asked of me. I need a walkthrough on this Google Classroom, and I need to better understand what my son's schedule, what my daughter's schedule is, where they're supposed to be at what time. Next slide, please. Looking at lessons and content delivery. Is the content appropriate? So once again, some things might not be easily transferable from the school, the brick and mortar school, to your virtual setting. But is there too much screen time and not enough breaks? Too many videos with fill in the blank and tell us what you thought. There were times when I had to email right away and say, look, my son can't type all these responses to the, watch this video and tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. PowerPoints with 16 slides in them. He can do 5 slides. Can we just eliminate some of this? So how much independence does your child have and how much is it depending on you? And if you can kind of categorize that and percentage wise, these are the things that my son or daughter can do without me. All the rest of this stuff, he's 100% counting on me to be there. Modifications. So that's the huge thing in IEPs, right? We fight for services, we fight for supports, and we fight for modifications. Are they being delivered in the home content? So font size, reading level, visuals, are they doing a lot of the things that they would be doing in the classroom or in the school that give access to learning? Because remember, the most important thing here is access and that things are doable and students can be successful. So if there's too much time typing and behavior plans and rewards are not being reinforced, that's something too that you can itemize here and you can start to think about what can we solve and what can we get at specifically. Levels of enjoyment and frustration, and I think this is super basic. I had the day where it was, you're not my teacher, you're my mother, I'm home, this is vacation. Where do you go with that? And sometimes it's like calling the teacher and saying, look, she's not listening to me. I need you to intervene. He needs to have a one-on-one call with you. But if there's anger and confusion with the change, once again, is this something that you need to call a case manager, that you need to get other help with? Because it's really basic that if we can't articulate what we need, no one can help us. And I think this taking a step back and having something like this where you have to pause and and look at the different pieces of it can help us all articulate better what our needs are. So next slide. So the supports and therapies, and I think Dave and Barbara really touched on how difficult it is to deliver some of these supports and services in a virtual environment. And they may be something that needs to be delivered in a compensatory arrangement, but at the same time, can we be creative? Can we think out of the box? And what are the things that are being missed the most? Can you find some way to work together as a collaborative team to develop some creative ways to get some of this stuff done? And then overall, if you had to pick a few words, if you had to think about and write something very simple down that would categorize this experience for you. And if that is overwhelmed, or if that is, it's manageable, but what is the but? You know, what would help me to support my child better? So I hope this is something that's beneficial, and I hope that we can all remember as we're going through this, that this is new and hard and challenging for everyone. But as we're hearing over and over and over during this pandemic, we're in this together. And I think we're all in it together for our kids. So the best thing we can all do is be positive and collaborative. And if this hopefully will help us identify the things that we need to look at individually to solve some problems and engage together. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Paul Barbato, friend and colleague, Director of Special Services at Dumont.
Thank you very much, Susan. And I want to echo Susan's sentiments for our collective gratitude for NJPTA and NJPSA-FEA for facilitating this webinar for our parents in our state. It's very informative. With respect to the virtual learning communication inventory that Susan developed, I'd like to process through a few scenarios with you and kind of share what we experienced as challenges and how we address them. Next slide, please. So take this scenario. Your child's teacher has set up virtual learning via an online platform, and you don't have access to technology for your child to access at home. So we had this barrier, and we addressed it with sending out a survey to all our parents, and other districts nearby up in Bergen County have done similar procedures in surveying parents to ask what technology needs they had in their homes. And as Susan mentioned, as Barbara echoed, the multiple devices in the home, or bandwidth difficulties, or access to Wi-Fi, and we provided laptops and access to other technology for parents and Wi-Fi hotspot information. In addition to that, our district sent out a consent form. This way, all parents were aware that if group instruction were taking place or individual services, what the parameters of that time with the teacher virtually would look like. So we shared what appropriate netiquette looks like, and that was communicated to parents directly. And we asked them to return. And similar districts that I've spoken with and that we've had interactions with have had similar procedures. Our superintendent and our Board of Education have been tremendously supportive and informative throughout this whole process, which makes it very smooth moving forward. Next slide, please. Your child receives IEP-driven related services, speech therapy and occupational therapy, and it's not just exclusive to these two. You've not heard from the speech and language specialist or occupational therapist since your child's school closure. What can you do? Now, this can pertain to IEP-driven related services of counseling or PT, okay? So ideally, each related service provider has contacted you as the parent and worked out a schedule where, among the many other content areas and service deliveries that you're navigating with your child at home, that you have a visual schedule of a time or how it's going to be delivered and the appropriate supports that your child needs to access that virtual delivery. I've asked each of our related service providers to call each parent and to provide me a schedule. This way I had a bird's eye view of which parents received communication, and Barbara mentioned before the communication and collaboration and how I deal with those two together to have something communicated clearly, set up a schedule, and also monitor accordingly with a weekly check-in with parents how things are going. Parents were assured that virtual learning and related services are correlated to goals and objectives. This way, there was no mystery of where the activities would come from and what they would be about. They were geared specifically toward their individual child's goals and objectives. So progress monitoring can still occur, and that communication can still occur with areas of difficulty or progress. Next slide, please. Your child receives in-class resource, and you're concerned that your child has not received certain modifications. What can you do? A lot of districts, including where I work in Dumont, have had their case managers call each parent and check in with them to see if they have what they need and if they have concerns regarding anything about the child's IEP and providing specialized instruction. And whatever program that looks like, it could involve the special ed teacher in a general ed setting, it could be within a pull-out replacement program or within a special class or other mixture of programmatic deliveries. So with this scenario, we've had our teachers make contact with parents one-on-one to describe, this is how you access Google Classroom. This, I'm going to send a video that I've made with Screencastify. I'm going to narrate what your child will do with you. We've modified these slides according to the current IEP. So we've had that contact with parents. So if you haven't, your simple procedure would be to contact the case manager who facilitates that home and school relationship with any concerns. And the case manager will navigate that discussion and facilitate either a meeting or an update to the IEP if needed. But the major important rule of thumb is to always involve the case manager. Next slide, please. Your child's reevaluation started before the school's closure, and not all data identified from the reevaluation planning meeting has been collected. So Mr. Nash addressed this earlier, that you want to focus on portions of the evaluation that can be done. And that could involve rating scales. It could involve already completed evaluations prior to the school closure. And your case manager will navigate the process with you and either share with you that once schools are opened, where we have access to students in a way that allows for testing protocols to occur, then we'll update the process and we'll use the data we have to make informed decisions, with that caveat of memorializing exactly the context that we're making these decisions in. Next slide, please. Suppose another parent shared with you that her child has been having some social emotional difficulties at home and ask you for advice. What can you do? So your first step could be to contact your building principal, who can then facilitate discussion with your school counselor, or perhaps the school psychologist or school social worker. All those educational specialists are working as well. Ours are working closely with families, providing counseling services via virtual with parent permission and a set schedule. And if it's something that extends beyond the school, our counties in our state, all 21 of them, have what's referred to as a care management organization, or a CMO. And these organizations are here to help us. And there's a contact number if you were to call Perform Care, and you can go to the website for Division of Children and Families, and you'll see it right on the cover page of the website of DCF, Division of Children and Families. So if the scope of difficulties extends outside the school day or occurs on the weekend and you need immediate concern, you know, friendly advice may sound like, let's call Perform Care, and they would be able to be linked with services. I also want to bring your attention to the resources in this PowerPoint, and it should be the second to last slide. You don't have to jump to it now, but I want you to know that you'll have access to this. And the last two resources are important. The first one is really dealing with how to support individuals with autism through uncertain times. And what I like about this 60-page document is that it focuses on maintaining and building new routines. And I think that applies for all of us. And very, very concrete strategies throughout the document. And what it also offers are 7 strategies to support students with ASD. So it provides coping and calming skills, and it's definitely a resource for you to check out, and it applies to a lot of the circumstances that we find ourselves in now. The second document I'd like to bring your attention to is something referred to as Mental Health and COVID-19 Information Resources. And what's interesting about this document is that it's from a nonprofit organization called Mental Health America, which has been around since 1909. And it provides a list of 44 education companies that are providing free subscriptions for you at home to use as parents. And it also provides a link in an alphabetical list of virtual school activities for all ages, as well as learning resources, and some of which are from Lakeshore Learning Materials. And it's updated every few days, so it's a very active document to keep track of. Now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ashley Soltanki. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And I just wanted to follow up and also thank NJPSA, FEA, and the New Jersey Parent Teacher Association for giving me this opportunity to speak to everyone this evening. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about are managing challenging behaviors and some strategies for parents during this very difficult time. So let's talk first about some of the functions of challenging behavior. That includes trying to get something that you want. So that may be attention from a peer, a sibling, a parent, or a teacher. It could also be trying to gain access to a tangible object, some kind of event or activity. So for example, screen time, or a toy or a game, something like that, or some kind of automatic positive reinforcement, which is more sensory in nature. The other aspect of functions of challenging behavior are to avoid or escape something that you don't want to happen. So that would include tasks that are too long, too challenging, an uncomfortable situation, or again, some kind of automatic negative reinforcement, which is sensory in nature. Next slide, please. So some strategies to help your child sit calmly and attend better to instruction. The first thing we should do is gain our child's attention and eye contact before delivering information. This is something that our teachers are very well versed in, and it's something that we can learn from them. They have to command the room. So if we are trying to work with our children and our students, we need to be able to gain their attention and hold it for a prolonged period of time. The other aspect of that is giving them attention breaks and giving them opportunity to let loose and get some of that energy burned out. So something that I've done before in group work is allow students to get up and move about for a few minutes, jumping jacks, hopping up and down, running in circles. That just allows them to take a break, and then they can really refocus when we get back to the work, and they're able to move through the information more effectively. The other thing that I find with my students is preparing for transitions can be really difficult. So children often don't have a great sense of time constraints. And so if you say, okay, well, 20 minutes, you'll work on this activity. If it's a really fun activity, by the end of that 20 minutes, they're like, wait, that was only a few minutes. I need 5 more minutes. I need 1 more minute. So preparing them, putting in timers, having them practice the routine of, okay, we're moving from this activity to this activity. That allows them the opportunity to be more prepared and handle the transition in a more practical and functional way. Also, chunking is a really, really great tool for that we use. That allows the student to have access to very abbreviated pieces of their work, and that helps them move forward, and they're able to get it done more quickly. Another great piece is trying to engage them in a calm environment. So I know sometimes it can be really challenging if you're doing work at the kitchen table and you have a few of your children doing work at the kitchen table, maybe someone's trying to do work when you're making lunch or making dinner, it can be a little bit chaotic. So trying to have them separate and give them the opportunity to work in a more calm environment, give them headphones, put on soothing music, really help them set up that space and their work environment so that they're able to work through whatever homework or assignments they're working on. And then some physical cues. So things like tapping the table, that helps them kind of refocus, and they're becoming more attuned to what's going on in their environment. Next slide, please. So strategies to focus and decrease distractibility. So for our students who have ADHD or have difficulties with attending to information over long periods of time, what we want to do is provide them only the necessary materials. So don't allow them to have a crowded workspace. Just give them what they need for that exact lecture, and then you can provide additional materials as needed. Modify their tasks. So like what we were talking about before with chunking, also allow them to break it into manageable steps and highlight if necessary. Another really important tool is teaching them the ability to summarize. So if you're able to focus on what's important and then kind of skim over the rest of the information, that allows them to really adhere to what they're doing and kind of ignore the rest of the noise that might be going on. Also, simple positive directions. So model that behavior, provide labeled praise, and encourage them to restate what they're doing. So make sure they really understand and they're paying attention to what the task is. Another piece would be to teach memory strategies. So brainstorming, note-taking, mnemonics, these different things will allow them to consolidate the information they're learning and really put it into long-term memory storage. Also insist on instructional readiness. If they need to be prepared in class with good body posture, eye contact, needed materials at school, then they should be able to do the same thing at home during their work period. They should be able to really focus on their assignments because that allows them to have the structure and the focus that they need. Also, multisensory materials. So what we've found in the research is that our students they really learn the material in multiple ways. So first they can see it or they can hear it, then they can use some type of tool that allows them to get a better sense of the hands-on aspect of it. Then that really helps them focus and keep that information into long-term memory for later. Next slide, please. And then impulse control. So some strategies to assist with managing impulse control. There's several support groups. CHAD, which is Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is a really great one that has a lot of tools and a lot of information for parents. Systematic praise. So keeping the positive feedback at the ready. Labeled praise is a really important tool. So great job following directions. I love how you're sitting and working so quietly. These different things will really help them understand, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and this is how I can continue to receive that positive feedback. Opportunities for self-regulation, self-evaluation, and self-monitoring. So take their emotional temperature. How's your day today on a scale of 1 to 5? Are you feeling really happy? Are you feeling really sad? Kind of check in with them and make sure that they're not having a rough day. And if they are, then give them the space to work through that. So give them some breathing techniques. Check in frequently to see if their mood has changed from earlier in the morning to later in the afternoon. And then the homeschool communication and carryover. So my colleagues have been really providing some really great information and just continue to check in with the teachers, make sure that the child is doing exactly what they need, or if not, what are some strategies that you can use to help them? Next slide, please. So what happens if our children are engaging in any negative behaviors? One of the biggest things that we can do is use Socratic questioning. So really allow them the opportunity to engage in that critical thinking and analysis that will help them choose the correct behavior moving forward. For example, what do you think you should do if you want money to buy that video game, that toy, that bicycle? Let them engage in that kind of thinking. Let them problem solve, let them move forward with the tasks. This is really beneficial for them in the future and in the present. So where can you go if you're confused about something? What should you do if you forget how to get to or which way to go to? Don't use vague statements like "we'll see," because that doesn't have any commitment, and we want to make sure that if we're expecting or we're requesting their direct attention, their ability to move through different scenarios, we should also mimic that, and we should be able to give them firm and committed responses. Also, don't take away everything that a child loves and owns as a consequence of negative behavior. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we're talking about screen time, but what you can do is, instead of doing that, set up contingencies where they have the opportunity to earn additional time. So rather than saying, I need you to do your homework or I'm taking away your Xbox, start with them moving through the work, and then, okay, you can have 5 minutes, you can have 10 minutes, you can have 20 minutes of time playing your Xbox or engaging in some other preferred activity. And then finally, don't say I don't care what your friends are doing, especially in a time like this. They feel isolated enough as it is, but validate their feelings. Show them that you understand just how frustrating the information is and how frustrating the experience of remote learning can be. And, you know, give them a little bit of latitude. Next slide, please. So reducing excessive screen time. This is something that a lot of the families that I work with now are struggling with. So child may be on their video game system or computer for 6 to 8 hours a day, and it's really hard to get them to transition to another activity or dinner or bedtime. So one thing that we really stress is practicing good sleep hygiene. So no screens at this time, and that's a family-wide rule that really lets them kind of wind down and get ready for bedtime, and then it really helps them learn, okay, this is my transition time without any screens. Explore some activities that will create distance from screen time, especially now that we're getting into spring. The weather's really nice. Let them go outside, encourage that activity, encourage imaginative play, especially if they have siblings. Have them do different things together at the varying levels that they can all work on collaboratively. Also, primarily use screen time for work and or education, and then contact with friends and family. Try to limit the screen time for recreational use as much as you possibly can, and encourage them instead to do any other activities that are available. Also, set limits for the screen time. So like I said earlier, try to have them add time by engaging in positive behaviors. So have it as a reward, but also really set the limit and stay consistent with the limit setting. So when they ask for 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes or 1 more minute, try not to give in. Try to stay firm on that limit setting, and then they'll be less likely to ask for it because they won't get that inconsistent response from you. Also, role play the transition. So this is something that I work with a lot of families on. Practice. So before you get into a situation where there's an argument or a disruption, practice that transition from whatever the screen that they're using to whatever activity that would follow, and let them really get the sense of practicing it in a positive way, and then practice whatever scenario could possibly go wrong, and then you can kind of problem solve from there. Next slide, please. So when problem behavior occur, we have some strategies to help you move forward from there. So one thing is planned ignoring. With planned ignoring, the biggest thing is maintaining safety. So if there are no overtly dangerous behaviors happening, then planned ignoring is okay. So don't attend to the behavior until a positive target behavior that you're looking for is achieved, and then you can attend to the information or attend to the child after that. Corrective feedback. So hey, Johnny, I know you like playing with Legos, but you know, it would be really helpful if you help me clean them up, and then the next time you have your friends over, then you can play. So that provides them with the information as to why they're doing the task that you're requesting of them. Give them that information. Then we have 2 very similar strategies. So they're very similar to timeout, except the first one is sit and watch. So that allows the individual to sit and observe the correct behavior modeled by 2 other participants or several other participants, and really help them learn how to engage appropriately. The second is sit and think. So that just has the child sit and really take responsibility for whatever action occurred and allows them to take that and move it into the next situation if that behavior occurs again. Response costs we talked about a little bit, with removal of a preferred activity or item based on behavior. So for example, with adults, we engage in speeding, we get a speeding ticket. So there needs to be some kind of consequence for a behavior that is not desired or not acceptable. And then finally, positive practice. So this is something that can be implemented right away. If a negative target behavior occurs, then have them practice that target behavior multiple times. So if they slam a plate down on the table, have them pick up that plate and practice putting it down gently the way they are supposed to. And that allows them to really ingrain that behavior in their repertoire. Next slide, please. So some tips for parents and teachers. Really scaffold your assistance. So the same thing as when you taught them how to tie their shoes. First you did it for them, and then you slowly retreated in terms of giving them that autonomy to do it themselves. When they're learning to solve a problem or work through something in school, help them, but then allow them the opportunity to make the mistake and learn about it in a different way. But provide the level of support, meet them there. Also focus on the positives rather than the negatives. So really positive praise for everything that they're attempting. That will really foster an ability and a desire to work through more challenging situations. And then working on one skill at a time. It can be really overwhelming if children are trying to work through multiple difficult situations all at once. So help them by structuring it where you're only working through one challenging task at a time. Next slide, please. So some challenges related to time management. So sometimes we don't know how long a task will take. So sometimes we get sidetracked when we're working on a task. And this can end up with children working on their homework for 3 hours instead of 30 minutes. So some strategies, and this can also happen, like I said earlier, with screen time. They say, okay, 20 minutes, I put the timer on, and all of a sudden that 20 minutes is gone, and they don't realize that it was so quick. So some strategies to help them is give them a sense of time. Really start to track and plan. Track when you're planning on doing your homework, between which hours, and then track exactly how long it really takes. And that gives them a sense of if they're right on target or if they need to modify their work schedule a little bit. And then teach their promptness for starting tasks. So if you say, okay, I'm starting my homework at 9 a.m., then be ready to go at 9 a.m. And that teaches that responsibility and the accountability that our students require. Next slide, please. And then some challenges related to planning. So difficulty breaking down large tasks into small steps and knowing where to start. That can lead to procrastination and rushing to do things at the last minute. That can be very stressful, and that can be something that follows us throughout our lifetime. So something that you can do is every evening work through a nightly plan. So what are you attacking the next day? That can be for each evening, that can be a Sunday evening that you work through for the rest of the week. Whatever you think in terms of setting up some kind of calendar for the different activities that you'll be engaging in throughout the week. And then set up your workplace for success. Like I said, try to keep everything neat and organized, try to limit any distractions. So any toys or games, your cell phone, if that's something that's distracting, try to limit the access to that and really just set them up for success. Next slide, please. And then these are our resources that we have available.
Okay. Hello. So I think I'm on. Okay. So now, David, I don't know if there were any questions that you wanted to ask at this time before we wrap up. I'm not.
So Sure. Just a couple of quick questions. We did see a couple of themes I wanted to mention. The role of a paraprofessional and how we think about what we can do with a paraprofessional during the closure. Anybody want to talk about some of the creative things we might be doing?
Okay, Paul, looks like you want to say something. So you go ahead. You're muted.
You're muted, Paul.
Sorry about that. Okay, I think I'm okay now. So that's a great question, and a lot of districts have struggled with incorporating the use of paraprofessionals within the course of instruction. And I've leaned on our special ed teachers and general ed teachers to inform us of how best to do that. And incrementally and strategically, with the parents' involvement, with the teacher's supervision, whether within a Google Meet or within a Zoom. I had some general ed teachers and special ed teachers who work together already in station teaching have a second device and have a paraprofessional working with a small group within earshot and within visual of that small group in action. And someone mentioned earlier about the multisensory strategies. I think it was Dr. Ashley. And we incorporate a lot of those strategies with the use of our younger students. And that's where our paraprofessionals are always involved with that direct instruction. So I think to answer the original question, it has to be strategic, has to be planned in accordance with a clear schedule and with clear oversight. And certainly that may vary with the level of need the child has, and certainly with the administrative involvement of what would be conducive for that maximum learning to access specialized instruction.
Right. I would just add to that that we're hearing more and more as districts are figuring out ways to do this, where they're having the paraprofessional log on, be a part of the classroom, call the child, speak to the parent, make contact every day, be a part of their program. So I think people are recognizing and inventing ways for the paraprofessional to be a part of that instructional program, and it's happening more and more. And we need more ideas of how to do it. But just as Paul said, they're part of a Zoom classroom. They take them to a different room, but it's an important question.
I know our time is short. I do want to bring up one other question for students who are on a 504 plan. We obviously focus today on students who have an IEP, but any tips on how parents should engage with the school district when the child is on a 504 plan, but not an IEP?
Go ahead, Paul.
Sure. We've had similar questions, and our building administrators have been amazing to realize and to reinforce with all teaching staff that a child with a 504, whether there are accommodations or modifications within that 504, are to be followed during our school closure. So the same parameters are in place for a child with a 504. So the parent can easily just call the building administrator and ask that question, maybe call for a meeting to discuss, to kind of see how these modifications or accommodations are being provided, by the contents area, whatever the 504 has listed. But that first procedure would be to have a meeting with the administrator or the teacher, if the parent is aware of which teacher is in charge of specific accommodations as it related to that content area.
Great. And I'll mention one last question. There was a question, or a number of questions about related services. So there was some confusion on this issue, but the New Jersey State Board of Education on April 1st passed the emergency regulation, making clear that we can provide virtual related services. So school districts, once they receive that clear direction, are now working with parents to make sure those related services are provided. And there can be challenges, it can be very complicated to do, but the effort is underway and it's clear that it's permissible to provide those services virtually.
Right, thank you. Well, our time is running down, and I want to just say that the resources were hard to read on the PowerPoint, but when you'll receive it, we'll make sure that you can read them, because I think they're hard to read. But we'll make sure you can read them, and you will receive the tool that Susan talked about and developed. And we just wanted to show you the next upcoming webinar on April 28th, 7 to 8, that we talked about before, which was tools, again, dealing with social media responsibly for our students. I want to again thank everyone. I want to thank Paul and David, Susan and Ashley, Pat and Kathy and Brenda for working on this. And it was really wonderful to have this partnership with PTA because, as Susan always says, and I think it's very true, this was about parents and for parents and families. And so you can't be about us without us. So it was a wonderful partnership and we appreciate it and we appreciate your attending. And again, you'll receive the information with a certificate of attendance very shortly. And if you have any questions, you'll contact us. So thank you again and good night.